Good Saturday morning and welcome to On the Mark alongside Mark Pappa. I'm Gary Byron. Mark Pappa, of course, from Financial Resources Group located in Glastonbury. You can check them out online at www.f, as in Frank, frplan.com. By the way, when you're on their website, this is really cool. There's a link that will take you to their YouTube channel. Ooh, I know what you're thinking. There's a wealth of information. You can get these shows that are on there, maybe some that you've missed, or maybe you've missed partially, maybe you've missed the entire episode. Also, if you just happen to be on YouTube, you can certainly type into the search field Mark, M-A-R-K, P-A-P-P-A, 5207. That's Mark Pappa, 5207, and you can get his YouTube channel that way. And if you'd like to schedule a consultation, that's very easy. Here, write this phone number down and call it, 860-657-8380. Again, it's 860-657-8380. And if you missed any of those points of contact, no worries. I will be repeating them throughout the show. Mark, good morning. Great to see you.
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
I've got, as you can tell, I have allergies. I'm not even sure if it's allergies or a little bit of a cold. I'm a little you can tell I've got some congestion. I've got a bit of a cough. But, I was doing the show all week. My energy level is there. I sit so closely to my producer. He's not sick, so I'm thinking you can't catch allergies.
Well, unfortunately, fortunately, I guess your struggle. Well, I should say, unfortunately, the struggle is you're not alone in that in this battle. I know many people have been watching baseball games and going to parks for my son, watching him play, and the pollen is just so thick, and people's eyes are watering, and they're stuffy. And all I can say is I have one of those green machine blowers, and I probably hit my deck, at least twice a day. And I can't even sit out there because those little, I don't know what they call them, like little tails, fall in your face.
Yeah, the helicopters.
The helicopters, and all sorts. But hopefully, some of this rain will help that out.
I made the mistake of mowing my lawn in between rainstorms, because it was raining. This was last week. And I don't have a mask. I don't wear. Remember the COVID masks? I probably should have worn a mask just to protect myself from the pollen, but I didn't quite do that. I'm hoping this goes away sooner rather than later. So, folks, please bear with me this morning.
Everything happens in time, right? Time heals all wounds.
Well, that's what they say. How was your week? Well, I hope yours was better than mine.
So far, so good. We had some pretty big announcements to make, and I think most people are pretty happy to see the S&P 500 had fully recovered from the tariff announcements
on Liberation Day. Let's talk about the S&P 500 recovery then.
Yeah, well, we saw a 12% drop from April 2nd to April 8th, which is pretty scary, and then you saw the NASDAQ drop 20%, literally entered a bear market in a very, very fast period of time. And it's amazing how markets work nowadays. if you look at, you had the crash of 29 and then a very long period of recovery going all the way through World War II. And then, you've had, so there's all these different periods of uncertainty, but it seems like these crashes that we're having because of information, speed of information, the panic and the fear button, because we have social media, we have news media, we have alerts on our mobile phones, and I think it's just making people freak out a lot more than they used to in the years past. So you look at the crash of 29, very, very long recovery, less people were in the market. You look at 73 to 74 bear market was pretty brutal, and it was a slow drip, and we pretty much lost the decade of the 70s there.
Wow.
And then you go into the 2000s, right? You had the dot-com bubble. So then your next crash was in 08, right, for 08, 09. And then from there, you've had some other some other types of crashes, but most recently we had the COVID crash, which was, and then, but so remember I said in that one of my last episodes, I said, look, there's lots of rain clouds.
Sure.
Eventually they're going to run out of water.
Course.
The clouds are going to clear and the sun's going to come out.
It always does.
And that's exactly what happened here is that, last time, it was, we saw, the tariffs and 145, whatever it was, crazy number, 145% on China, where we're going to drop that down to 30. So all the trade deals that I mentioned, I said, they're going to come out with trade deals and they're going to start making these announcements. I think the first one was the United Kingdom, where we cut our trade deal, which I thought was a pretty good deal as a template for the future. And then, of course, we still don't have finality on all these deals, but it's pretty much the handshakes are there, and then the granularity and the legal part gets done. But they're pretty much at a stage where they're agreeing, to work together and set a baseline tariff in the UK of 10%. And then, you're also looking at India, which we're proud to say that we own in our portfolio as a single country. We think India has a very bright future, which we're very happy about.
But India was at war for a little while.
They were
with
at
Pakistan.
War with Pakistan, and that also supposedly, I think the skirmishes got cleared up. I don't think that in the long run that's.
It's a temporary truce, is what Trump asked for. Who knows how long that will last?
Exactly. Who knows? There's always going to be, disagreements and wars and things to scare the market. Always, and the market finds a way around that. For some reason, it always finds a way over the long haul, finds its way up. It's just these short-term blips or these short-term bear markets. So your average bear market's 18 months. So that's the average bear market. I think more recently, we didn't have any Fed action to bail us out, which I mentioned wasn't going to happen. But we did have, some pretty interesting things happen. We have the trade deals. We've had some very good news on the inflation front. The CPI came out at 2.3% versus 2.4%. And everyone was saying, this tariff talk is going to raise prices and increase the cost of everything. Even the cost of eggs are down. You haven't seen that in gasoline. So what's really happening is economics is taking over at this point.
What's happening in the UK?
Well, the United Kingdom actually, based on the news, their middle cap stocks were less exposed to U.S. tariffs, had a pretty nice recovery. So the FTSE 250 outperformed. The FTSE 250 is the mid cap stocks. Outperformed the FTSE 100, and that's because it's more. Most of their companies they're more consumer facing businesses in the not only just in the UK but in Europe. So they're a little bit different economy. They don't have they have technology companies, but they don't have these mega tech companies like we do, and the mega services that they're trying to copy or duplicate. But we just have a different economy. We're a much more diverse economy than some of those other countries are. Which makes us the juggernaut that we are, but we're also a more free economy, which I think, more small business led. And I just can see that just as a note, private equity, which is institutional investors, they're private equity firms that are buying up plumbers, they're buying up electricians, they're bundling up businesses and rolling up all sorts of different services. I'd be surprised if landscapers, I know one of the landscapers in my town was actually owned by a private equity firm now. One of the plumbers that I use is now owned by a private equity firm. Was he a sole
proprietor, just a small business?
I think he was a fairly decent-sized corporation with lots of contracts, and they had recurring revenue. And the institutional investors just loved it. So, but, to get back to tariffs, I'm just glad to see things get back to some level of normalcy. And I know on Wednesday – the president was in the Middle East at the conference there, and the Qataris announced that they were going to buy 150 new Boeing 747 jets or 757 jets. So that's a really, really big deal. That shows a long-term commitment to the United States.
How long would that take? 10 years?
I don't know. I know there's been some hubbub about their $400 million plane that they're gifting to basically augment the Air Force One. And if you look at the contract, Boeing was supposed to be done with those two new Air Force Ones by 2025.
Yeah, they're not going to make that deadline.
They've been delayed to 2027. So I really hope Boeing as a company can really get things cleaned up and, and because it's a huge part of the United States, huge part of our economy, at least in the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest, excuse me.
Boeing's been having some issues too.
Major issues, and we won't get into that today. That could be a whole 2 episodes on that one. But today, though...
How about China? If you want to get to something else, that's fine. But I can't talk about India and the UK and talk about this recovery from Liberation Day if we don't talk China, at least for a few minutes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, China has been the elephant in the room the entire time.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring them up.
Yeah, the elephant in the room. And I would say it's really difficult to understand how the Chinese negotiate. They are definitely different. They're culturally different than we are used to in the Western European economy. But they definitely have a very good negotiation skills. So I believe President Xi was more or less saying he was pounding his chest saying, hey, I stood up to Trump and we're going to get a good deal. And Trump was saying, I stood up to Xi and we're going to get a good deal, which I think is kind of interesting. So we don't really know. Yeah, they both win. And we don't know, based on what airwaves really goes on behind closed doors in those rooms. But they did agree to another 90-day trade truce during their talks in Switzerland, which, some people say nothing really happened. But I think the trade truce is important because you saw what the markets did when, we reduced our tariffs on Chinese imports by 104%. I had mentioned in a past episode that there was about $150 billion surplus that China sells us versus what we sell them. And what we're trying to do from our end is open up their markets, have them become less protectionist. Mm-hmm. And that's tough to convince because you're trying to convince the Communist Party of China, even though they have some entrepreneurial background. They let their economy, they opened up, but they tightened up their economy dramatically, or I'd say over the past 5 years since COVID. They went after tech billionaires. They're trying to, level the playing field because they have a huge amount of people in the rural areas that are still uneducated, still not living way below the standards of people who are living in Shanghai. But they felt that many of these billionaires, like Jack Ma, disappeared. That scared me. I sold China when that happened. I said, that's it, blanket sell, across the board. And I got emails from clients saying, thank you for doing that. You know what? Although it might make us money, we're glad that we don't want to be associated with that type of thing. And then you also have some of the human rights issues. The Uyghurs that they've found. Let's face it, the re-education camps, which go back many years in the Communist Party, right? You're lucky to make it in the re-education camp in some cases. Otherwise, they're just a goner.
But isn't it in China's
tied to factories?
Isn't it in China's best interest to maintain a positive relationship with the United States? We buy so much of their goods.
Yeah.
So how does the tariff?
It's almost impossible for the two not to be interrelated. You have to be connected. China can't survive domestically alone without our purchasing power. We're the largest consumer in the world. We're a consumer-led economy. Our GDP is dramatically greater than theirs. Even though they're number two, they're trying to catch up. And maybe eventually, I mentioned in past episodes, based on population growth, productivity growth, income growth, they may catch up one day. But they had also the one-child policy for many years, which is slowing them down. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see. I really hope, though, I think for the greater good of everybody, because the Chinese people as a whole are wonderful people. I do business with them. They're wonderful people. They're hardworking. They're industrious. They are always looking for opportunities, and they didn't have that. Many of them didn't have those opportunities growing up, or at least where they grew up in China back in the day. So interesting enough, they immigrated here. They're here legally, and they're working hard and doing a lot of wonderful things. Let's face it, they built our railroads back in the 1800s. So it's not like they're new to us, right. But awesome people. So whenever, we look at the news tries to paint this country as an enemy, don't forget that that's their government. There's people backing that up. And, you also saw the sanctions were also lifted on Syria as part of these talks with the Saudi Arabians as well in Saudi Arabia, which I think was necessary. And it sounds crazy, but how are you going to get an economy that's been devastated, that's in shambles or rubble, that's been bombed and had a dictator, right, to recover if you don't take sanctions off?
Right.
You've got to, you can't keep sanctions on a country and then say, okay, we're going to help you recover get back to where you were normal. And that's Syria. And a lot of people don't realize, but Steve Jobs actually had Syrian blood in him. He was the founder of Apple. So, always look at the people, never look at the government, and look past the rhetoric and understand what the real motivations are.
Well, he was in Saudi Arabia. Trump sounded like he wanted to meet with Syria as well, and bring them into the fold.
Well, I mean, we have a lot of tools to negotiate with some of these countries. And, you want Syria on your side. And again,
they had just had a civil war.
They had a horrible civil war. But, not to get too deep into the weeds there, but, Iran is an enemy. You want somebody close. You're going to keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But you want somebody who's in that region to be, you have to be friendly in the region.
Yours.
I mean, because everybody understands that. You're better off in a peaceful environment than you are constantly worrying.
So before we switch gears, just summarize. If you were to put everything that we just discussed, into a 2-minute summary since Liberation Day, how would you just summarize that?
Well, I would summarize it as I think it was the tariffs really frightened a lot of people. I think a lot of people put their politics ahead of facts, ahead of noise, ahead of turmoil, and sold out of the market, panicked out. And then as a result, Trump pivoted. Let's face the facts.
Yeah, he did.
His Treasury Secretary said, hey, buddy, it's time to pivot. This market is bleeding, and you don't want that. Smart guys like Buffett say buy blood when there's blood in the streets. Most people can't do that. But I would say that a lot is cleared up. A lot of those, there's plenty of rain clouds left, but it's not pouring and thunderstorming. It's sprinkling, okay? Right now it's sprinkling. So we have a period of calm. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. It's going to take some time. However, again, going back to my last couple episodes, if you have a diversified portfolio, okay, and you're properly allocated and you understand what the risks are, and you can stay in the market. Okay, if you are nosebleed and you were just had your money in the S&P and you S&P 500 index fund, and you might have panicked out. So that's a part of my job as an advisor, is to let people know this is going to clear. This too shall pass. But you're diversified, and don't worry about selling out of the market, because if you miss those best days back on the market, you are going to never recover. And that's not a good outcome for anybody. So we don't want to see that.
Folks, you are listening to On the Mark, along with Mark Pappa. I'm Gary Byron. Mark is from Financial Resources Group. His business is in Glastonbury. You can find out more about his company online at frplan.com, frplan.com. And if you would like to meet with him and find out how can he help you, sit down. There's never any obligation for you to sit down with him and discuss. 860-657-8380. I'll repeat both of those more towards the end of the show. So, scams, they are everywhere. Texts, emails, even fake love interests. I mean, let's start with a check. Like a fake check scam. How do you spot these?
It's been going on a while.
Yeah.
That's an old one. So to put this episode together, I actually want to give a plug to 2 areas that people should focus on when they're certainly not sure of something. Okay. One of them is the AARP. AARP has, and again, AARP knows who the target people are. People over 55. People who have money, people who, scam artists aren't going after the poor. Let's face it. And I hate to use the word poor, but the underprivileged folks. They want people with money. They want people that aren't paying attention. They're trying to catch you off guard. And that's one of the main things. So AARP has a tremendous resource. And then remember that episode I did, or part of my episode was identity theft. Identity theft. You can go to ftc.gov. In the ftc.gov, Federal Trade Commission will allow you to download that identity theft guide, but also there's plenty of resources to help you look up for scams. Social Security Administration. If you go Social Security Administration, SSA scam, IRS.gov scam. They're constantly putting out scam alerts. One of my custodian, one of the that we use, Charles Schwab. Now we're all familiar with Charles Schwab,
Sure.
Right? Talk to Chuck, right? They just put out an alert on our system about this fake email, phishing email that was going out, impersonating Charles Schwab. So people are getting better and better at putting out more and more resources. The problem is just like anything, Gary, with artificial intelligence. Criminals are very, very smart, right? They're using their brains for bad. They've come up with ways to catch us off guard when we least expect it. Okay?
So
let's talk about it.
Okay, let's talk about it. Because
Let's talk about the check scam. So,
all right, let's talk about
this actually happened to a real friend of mine going back. It's about 7 to 10 years, and he had gotten something in the mail that he had just won some lottery, and he was a young guy, and he thought, hey, I won like $5,000. And I'm going to go bring this to my bank and cash this check and take it from there. It looks legit. He went to his bank. He deposited the check in the bank. And it turns out that, according to the bank on the surface, the check seemed real. Then this is before the banks were really on a lot of this stuff.
But it bounced, I'll bet.
Well, here's what happens is there's a period of time, a space and time where the check has to clear. So within that period of time, what ends up happening is, and again, there's financial check scam experts out there who work at banks that know this stuff. But basically, they ask you to deposit it, and then they'll ask you to deposit the check and wire part of the money back, or buy gift cards with that check. Now, do you know have you been to CVS recently? If you buy a gift card for a friend, it'll make you a test that you didn't hear. Or no one has coerced you to buy a gift card.
Is that right? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, CVS has it. I think Walgreens has it. Anyone that sells the gift cards now, built into their POS terminal, which is point of sale terminal, it'll say, "Has anyone talked to you or coerced you to buy this card, or are you buying this on your own?" And you have to attest to it that you're not being scammed. So what they do is they take that money, they wire it back, and in the past, what they've done is that as you're trying to cash that check, they basically wire that money out, and you end up cashing a bad check. Basically, they take the money, and you're out the $5,000. And guess who has to pay for that?
You.
You're stuck, or at least back then. So there's so many other different kinds of scams, but one of the big ones I want to talk about, and this is we're all familiar with cryptocurrency, right?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. Bitcoin is hot right now. I mean, Bitcoin is on fire. Ethereum was on fire. A lot of these other cryptocurrencies are on fire. This is a hybrid kind of scam. It's called pig butchering.
I've heard of this. This is what I wanted to ask you about. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. This, by the way, if you have a Facebook account, you have a WhatsApp account, you have Facebook Messenger, you can become subject to these romance. It's a hybrid. It's almost like a romance scam. And they send you a very attractive young lady, sometimes might be Asian, but, they'll have this profile that's very opaque. But they're, and again, to an example, I have a friend of mine that got caught up in this as well, where this woman said, hey, let me help you secure your future. And he said, sure, let's go for it. And he ended up dropping, it was only not a huge amount, like $2,500. They took that $2,500 and the woman was showing him how to trade, what to buy, what to do. And the account grew to like $300,000. And he's like, oh, great. So how do I get my money out now? I want to go do something with it. Couldn't get his money out because it was never real money to begin with. So what they do is pig butchering is they fatten up the pig, okay? They fatten up the pig, and oftentimes it's friendly chats, or they'll post as a romantic interest, or they'll say, but basically your profits are 100% fake. when you go to get that money out, they'll ask you for a transfer fee. They'll ask you for even more money because you can't get it out on your own, even though you think it's your account. They'll ask you for even more money. They'll coerce you to say, oh, there's a transfer fee. Send us the money. And then you'll send them even more money and you're out all that money. This is a small example. I've seen examples of a lot more money.
It sounds similar. It's tied into a romance scam, isn't it?
Yes, because they're targeting people who are basically lonely, don't have anyone to talk to. Right. I'll give you an example, by the way, of how to spot those. So just this morning, and this is great timing because I had a woman friend me on Facebook, said that she worked for this company, which is a big fashion company in New York City. But she said she lives in Boston. She said she was the director of product development for this company. Okay? Mm-hmm. So what's the first thing you do? You go to LinkedIn and check if she really works there. She didn't work there. I linked her name into LinkedIn. There was no one even in there that was anywhere in the United States. They were all in France. You have to do
probably not even a real person.
You have to do
a stolen photo.
You have to do your research. Do your due diligence on this stuff before you and I could talk about this in the next episode.
And sadly, most people don't.
You have to do some basic research. Go to LinkedIn. If someone says they're the product director of a major company, you better be a product director of the major company. You have to do your due diligence and don't fall for this stuff.
Folks, if you would like more information on the subject that we have covered here this morning or any of the other subjects that we've covered on this show in previous weeks, and maybe you've missed some of the episodes or came in halfway through, all you need to do is head on over to Mark's YouTube channel. You can go right to YouTube and type in Mark Pappa, M-A-R-K, P-A-P-P-A, 5207, or you can go to Financial Resources Group's website. It's very simple to do that. Just go to frplan.com. And they've got a link that'll take you to their YouTube channel. That's kind of cool, isn't it? I would say sit down, do the checklist with him. I'll give you can get yourself a $100 gift card. Sit down with him and go over the checklist. Schedule that no obligation consultation today. 860-657-8380. Again, 860-657-8380. For Mark Pappa, I'm Gary Byron. Thank you so much for listening to On the Mark. Until next Saturday morning, have a good one, everybody. So long.